life and mindset coach and workplace neurodiversity educator who helps ADHD adults build nervous systems, safe lives, rebuilds self trust, and feel at home in their own minds again. Her approach blends live her approach blends lived experience neuroscience, slow build structure, and grounded mindset work, helping ADHDers stop walking up in survival mode and start building steady rooted lives they actually want to live in. I'm going to reread these things before I actually say it on air. How you doing, Leah?
I'm good, Will. How are you?
Good. I have not been this tongue tied in a very long time. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. No worries.
So, Leah is over in Germany, and I had the pleasure of coming across her. She is an ADHD coach, and I had the opportunity to speak to her for about an hour about a week ago. And we were getting into some pretty interesting topics, I felt like, where how does ADHD show up in our lives, especially in men's lives? How does it actually show up in our partners' lives, and about how to handle us? So, right now, I'm going to be turning the ball over to Leah and asking her about ADHD and what actually got her into this profession.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks again for having me. I love coming on and being able to have these chats about ADHD, but I really love directing things like this towards men, as I don't think there are enough outlets like this for men. I feel like that especially the work that I do in the coaching space, it is very female dominant, which I love. I love obviously working with women. And if you would have asked me at the beginning of my career who my kind of ideal client or whoever I thought I would work with the most would be, it would definitely have been women. But it has turned out to be at certain times more so men. 60%, of my clientele at one time were men. And so I really love the fact that guys are feeling more comfortable to reach out in these kinds of spaces, because I think for a long time, and I know that there is still a lot of stigma around mental health in general, but specifically for men. So it's really encouraging to see yeah, guys reaching out, getting support, asking for help. I've run a couple of men's small groups, which have been really, really nice to kind of get guys talking to other guys, because not to kind of gender the experience, but typically from what I see after working with hundreds of ADHDers, it does show up a bit differently for men than it does for women. Um, and again, that's a very generalized statement, so don't come at me in the comments. But yeah, so it's really great to get to be a part of this journey for men, of helping them dismantle the chaos that can be neurodivergence. And we talked about this in our initial chat of a lot of guys, I think a lot of people think that men are kind of bad at feelings. And men do tend to be, again, very generalized, more avoidant. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that guys were never taught how to recognize or articulate struggle. So it comes out as burnout, anger, avoidance. A lot of times it is handled, or at least handled, quotes, I'm using air quotes, in isolation. And that is where things can really go awry. So most of the men that I work with don't come to me and say, I'm struggling emotionally. They say, I'm exhausted, I'm angry, I'm burned out, because that's the language that they were given. So for a lot of us, that's where we start, and that's what we kind of start diving into, is that frustration, that anger, that exhaustion, all of that that shows up.
As a guy that has actually suffered with mental health, it has been difficult learning the language and
Mhm.
understanding the difference between frustrated and anger, even though we can use them similar. but they're
Yeah.
different. When obviously you got into this field, you were ready to work with more women and working
Mm.
with men. What was one of the things that you saw or like sparked your interest about how guys view ADHD differently than women?
Yeah, so like I said, I think that for men, ADHD shows up as feeling less than. I mean, it does for women as well, but I think for men, it's in a little bit of a different capacity of, again, and this is not me saying these things. This is just kind of the culture that most of my clients are in the UK, being that I live in Germany. So this is what I'm getting from most of those clients is that, they've always kind of been a slacker. Even if they're really driven and really, doing well, it's taking so much effort and energy and leaving them feeling really drained. There's a lot of comparison that goes on. And I know that that happens with women as well, but men, I should be able to do this. I need to just man up and, white knuckle my way through this. And again, it leads to a lot of men feeling completely isolated, completely alone, not understanding why, they feel like quote unquote fuck ups when they're really just struggling to figure out what is going on with my brain. And they think if I can just try harder and do more and show up in this way, that it's going to get easier. But if you're constantly working against your brain and trying to like round peg, square hole yourself, it is going to lead to nothing but burnout and exhaustion. So that's where a lot of my work comes in is figuring out, first of all, where are you struggling? Where are the places in your life? And again, we can come at this, obviously, I'm going to come at it from a neurodivergent ADHD lens. But that is where I start with everyone because a lot of the people I deal with are undiagnosed, they're self-diagnosed. The waiting list in the UK for diagnosis within the NHS, which is their national healthcare system, is up to 3 years. So a lot of people are, again, just saying, I think that this is it, but I'm not sure. Cool. I don't really care. Let's talk about where are you struggling? How are things showing up for you? And a lot of that is communication, um, emotional intelligence, emotional resilience, not really being able to regulate themselves, not understanding that they are deregulated. They just think, I'm not okay. And usually that looks like I am bad. I need to change. I need this, I need that. Um, and without really knowing, like you said, the language that goes with that. Oh, sorry. It can be really detrimental to the way that they show up in their relationships for themselves as fathers, as coworkers, as partners, as friends, all of that.
So, what has been some of the people that have found a way to you? How does their partners recognize that the guy is actually having a situation? And what is some of the language that the guy will actually say to you, saying, "Hey, my partner said X." What are some of the things that their partners are recognizing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is gonna be really different couple to couple. I've definitely worked with couples, I've worked with, just the men, just the wives, just, everybody in between. So, I think it really depends on where that specific person is struggling. There is a lot of, like I said, communication barriers with men, I think in general, and specifically in the work that I do with ADHD. There's so much, kind of fear of rejection. So a lot of us have not only just fear of rejection, which nobody likes rejection, right? Like, there's not too many people that are like, "Yeah, bring it on. I love to be rejected. Feels great." But a vast majority of ADHDers also struggle with what is known as RSD, which is rejection sensitive dysphoria. So this is where the smallest, like, "Hey, could you load the dishwasher with the silverware facing up instead of facing down?" Or, any kind of, like, perceived criticism feels like an actual physical onslaught. And women kind of tend to, I don't want to say get away with, but women do tend to be a bit more sensitive, at least on the outside. So when we're like, ah, that hurt my feelings, I don't know why you're telling me how to load the dishwasher, or that's just an example that me and my husband have had. So, um, so looking at the fact that that rejection sensitivity will show up and men don't know how to handle it, so they just get pissed. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to do it. So it shows up in anger versus like, okay, wait, yeah, like let's talk about it. Let me figure out how, like, why does that hurt my feelings so much that you're just asking me to do something a little bit of a different way? A lot of us don't know how to do that. And I certainly did not know how to do that before I started doing this work. Um, and now it is kind of a joke between my husband and I, like, he'll be like, hey, could you whatever? And I'll be like, don't tell me what to do. But it's become a joke, which is a really great outlet for me because a small part of me is like, don't fucking tell me what to do. Don't tell me. I don't need you to tell me what to do, because we also struggle with demand avoidance. So even if it's like, hey, you have mud on your face and you need to go wash it off, you look a hot mess. My initial reaction is going to be like, don't tell me what to do. I'm fine. Like, I revert back. We talked about this in our initial call. I revert back to, in that instance, like really like a little kid, like a 5-year-old. It's like, I'm fine. I like mud on my face. I put it there on purpose. Right. And so again, that can show up and it does. It heavily shows up across the board with ADHDers. Men just have a harder time understanding what is going on. So a lot of them shut down. A lot of the work I do is also around attachment theory. So looking at what your attachment theory is and how it is showing up in your relationship, whether that's anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, secure attachment, or disorganized. And how that is showing up. And a lot of men have never heard of attachment theory. A lot of the women I've worked with have. And so again, it's really just kind of dismantling some of these things, so that men can have a better understanding. And there's all this different stuff that goes in with men as well, as far as the pressures are different. The pressure is different on men than it is on women. Still pressure. Both women, both moms, both dads, have both genders and in between. Everybody has pressure, but it shows up societally different in men. They're supposed to be the providers, the ones that, bring home the bacon or whatever. And obviously that's changing. But it is still a very ingrained part of our society, and it can lead to so much guilt and shame and feeling like a failure for a lot of people, but especially for the men I work with.
So one of the things I was hearing too while you were talking about you and your partner and about
Mhm.
the ADHD, and then also when they're expressing something to you, it can create this agitation or even a fear response to
Mhm.
behave or to be able to protect. I curious about your perspective about learning how to, I don't want to say do couples counseling, but actually doing communication with somebody that you feel safe about being able to go through those emotional or fear responses with a person. What is your perspective about helping an individual that's more fear avoidant?
So I think that obviously looks like doing your best to be a safe space, right? And that can be really difficult if you don't feel like a safe space within yourself. So now we're kind of getting into some like more therapy stuff, which this is not meant for therapy, this is coaching, but this is the overlap, right? This happens. So you've got to look at, how am I showing up as a safe space for myself? And then how can I put that forward to my partner in a way that does not feel patronizing, in a way that not does not feel condescending? Being able to start kind of small. We talked about this in the last one as well, of like building that muscle. Because in the beginning, if any time somebody comes at you and says, "Hey, this really hurt my feelings," and your immediate response is to get your back up and to get defensive, It's not going to work. And so you've got to be willing to, this is really uncomfortable. I hate this. This is terrible. I do not want to hear this. Also, I am not being attacked here. You've got to be able to kind of figure out, and this takes some time, self-coaching. How can I kind of bring myself down off this ledge? This is not a personal attack. So one of the books I recommend to every single person I work with is, this is blurry, The Four Agreements. It's a small book. I have it on Audible as well, so I can just kind of listen to it if I'm having trouble sleeping or whatever. But one of the four agreements is don't take anything personal. And that is one of the hardest lessons that any of us can learn. I have had this book on, somewhat repeat since I first read it probably 5 years ago. And weekly, if not daily, one of the agreements still kind of shows up for me to work with. So yeah, being able to kind of have those conversations with your partner. And that's why I do love the idea of couples coaching or couples therapy, because you can have a third party there to dismantle a little bit of the harshness, I think, and especially depending on where you're at with your partner. If this is a pattern that you guys have been in for years, it is really hard to sit down. If your default is defensiveness and this person triggers that defensiveness, it's really hard to get out of it. But if you have a third party to say, well, what if you did this? Or what are your thoughts about that? It's going to be a softer, quote unquote blow coming from me, asking you to take a look at where's your responsibility in this for both parties. Yeah.
So you said something in the beginning of this and you went back to it several times. The difference between coaching and therapy. Can you explain that? So, because the reason I just realized it's like that's such a good proponent that I overlooked by actually talking about. So, what's the difference between coaching and therapy, and how
Yeah.
does a coach address things differently?
So, very, very basic overview of how this works. Therapy is typically going to look at your past. What all has happened to get you to where you are right now? What are those issues? Right. So, we're going to look at childhood, we're going to look at adolescence, we're going to look at, college years, past relationships, the relationships with your parents, your caregivers, your teachers, your coaches, all of that. Because your past obviously has brought you to this point. Coaching is more so going to take you from where you are right now to where you want to be. Now, that does not mean that your past will not come up. Obviously, I need to know about what got you to this point. Where are you struggling? Where have you struggled in the past? What do some of those traumas, big T, little t, everything in between, look like for you? So that we can start kind of dismantling and making sense of where you are now, and then we wanna look at where you wanna go. Now, it's not that therapists don't look at the future at all, obviously they do, but whereas therapy is really probably, in most cases, gonna start in the past and really work on that for a while, coaching's gonna start mostly in the present with a little bit of overlap in the past, and then we wanna move you forward. We wanna move you into actual ADHD management. So what are the patterns that we're seeing? What are the things that are repeating over and over that you keep struggling with? What are the, what I call catching your cues? So the things that your brain keeps telling you that keep fucking you up. So the example I always use is when my brain says, "You'll remember that. You don't need to write that down." Leah, you've never remembered anything in your whole life. What are you talking about? What this time is not going to be any different. That's a red flag for me. If my brain says, or another one is, "You've got plenty of time. You can chill for a little bit longer." That is an immediate red flag for me to, wait a second. If I'm saying that, I probably do not have said time, right? Time blindness, executive functions, ADHD, it all goes together. So that is a little bit on, I think I've gone on a tangent. That's a little bit of the difference between coaching and therapy. And therapy is obviously going to dive a lot deeper into traumas. So while a lot of coaches are trauma informed, therapy is a very different thing.
They have overlaps, like you said in the beginning, and then they have similarities. And I do believe in what you're saying about the coaching to be able to go forward. The thing that I've learned about being a peer specialist, similar to coaching, is using lived experiences, having a set parameter of guidelines that we're able to help a person and being able to change. When you are coaching a person that is actually starting to, I don't want to say heal, but be able to manage their symptoms a little bit more, what kind of relief do they usually present themselves with?
Yeah, so again, it can kind of depend on, ADHD is a spectrum, right? And so you've got people that are really high functioning, and there's a difference between high functioning and high masking, right? So high masking is again that white knuckling, square peg, round hole, that kind of situation. But you've got people that just like with autism, it's on a spectrum. So you've got whatever, 1 to 100. And I think most humans are somewhere on the neurodivergent spectrum, in some form or fashion. But, the type of things that I see when people start to, um, really kinda get a hold on this is, A, we're building foundations, right? So, we wanna really look at what are the main 2 things, in the beginning that would make you feel better. Just 2% more on top of your shit. And so we can really start looking at that kind of stuff. Maybe it's communication, maybe it's emotional resilience, maybe it's timeliness. So I have a dear client who I love, and she was one of those chronically late people, which a lot of us are, myself included. She was late everywhere she went. She was late to work. She was late to meeting friends for coffee. She was late, picking the kids up from school. It was just everything ran anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes behind. So her and I started working together, and that became like one of our foundational practices of every week we would build on that. What are we doing for time management? How's your time management looking? What is that? So she started prepping the night before, which is a big thing I talk to people about. Lay out your clothes like you are 7 years old. I'm talking, pants, underwear, bra, t-shirt, turtleneck, jacket, socks. What does the weather look like? Do you need a raincoat? Do you need an umbrella? Cool. You're going to the gym, pack the bag the night before. You need a protein bar and, your element, electrolytes, pack it all in your bag. Have that ready for you because you're more regulated in the evening. In the morning, you're tired. You're running around like a crazy person because you probably hit snooze one too many times. So the more you can do the night before when you're regulated, the better. Second thing we did was I need you to have a little bit of a list, a post-it or whatever. Where are the 5 things you need to check off before you walk out this door? Hers were keys, phone, work bag, work badge. She couldn't count how many times she like knew all of the custodial staff by, first name basis, which is, great. I love that. But it was because she'd be like, forgot my key again. I forgot my badge again. So they were just constantly having to let her in every single day. And she was like, I didn't even think about the fact like I'm allowed to pause. I'm like, you are fully encouraged to pause. If we could hit that pause button a little bit faster than we do, we would save ourselves a lot of strife. So we've worked together for, gosh, probably over a year now in one capacity or another. And when it came to the end of this year, we were talking about things that really made a difference in your life and blah blah blah. And she said, I'm on time now. I I know how to plan my time. I know how to work backwards now. And it is no longer something that I have to stress out about. I am no longer the late friend. I am no longer late to work. Obviously, still going to happen a time or two. And that's what I talk to people about a lot too. We are not trying to completely eradicate, like, you are never late again 100% of the time you're on time. But, 80, 85% of the time, we're on time. 20% of the time, hot mess dumpster fire. And expecting that, and instead of beating yourself up about it, being like, "Oh, well, Here's one of that 20%. All right, let's get back on the ball. What happened? And just kind of use it as data instead of a reason to, you know, inflict pain upon yourself by internal bullying. Data. What happened? I hit snooze one too many times. I did not listen to that cue and I sat on the couch and I dopa scrolled an extra 10 minutes and here we are. Right? So it's data collection. We are here to collect data like scientists, not hand out verdicts like judges. It's not going to get us anywhere. If bullying ourselves and judging ourselves and being all around shitty to ourselves worked, it would have worked by now.
Well, I got something funny for you. In the chat, somebody put a face palm with ADHD. I know the person personally, and I would actually use their name and time, or my brother's name and time, and they actually laughed because I say if I need to be somewhere at 9 o'clock, I say we'll be there. We need to be there at 8:40. Then I'll rewind the time for them,
Yeah,
and they eventually got up okay with. He's not trying to control me. He's just trying to control his emotions so he's not stressed out.
exactly. I love it.
but
Yeah.
but when you were talking about the shooting, the self-flogging, the upset, the I was thinking about that. I'm like, the difference between anxiety of actually not being good enough and then the ADHD of actually being scatterbrained and actually how that impacts other parts of emotions. Do you mind explaining like how they can have the overlaps? Do you know much between the anxiety and how the ADHD look very different, look similar in certain areas about actually needing to be everywhere, but then how ADHD can also create anxiety?
100%.
Perfect.
I actually have a great let me just pull up something really quickly and I can read it for you. So I chatted with a panel of psychologists
You
about
can actually
ADHD. They were therapists that, you know, really worked on the therapy side, but they were seeing a lot of clients that had been diagnosed with ADHD. So they wanted a better understanding for this. So I wrote them a resource, and it is very originally titled ADHD for Psychologists. um, but I kind of worded how all of this overlaps. So obviously, we have executive functioning deficits. So executive functions look like self awareness. These are the 12 that I work with: self awareness, planning and prioritizing, impulse control, attention control, working memory, emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility, organization, problem solving, self motivation, task initiation, and time blindness. So that's a lot. There's a lot of shit going on there, right? We've got all different kinds of the brain showing up. We've got the prefrontal cortex, we've got the dopamine pathways, we've got neuroepinephrine, we've got the basal ganglia, we've got the limbic system, the amygdala. All of that is firing in kind of a different way than quote unquote normal, however we want to throw that out there. And so a really good way to kind of look at this is and how it kind of all comes together in one big clusterfuck, if you will. So it creates a domino effect. So if you've got poor self awareness, it makes it hard to recognize why you're avoiding tasks. And then weak planning and prioritizing leaves you unsure of where to start, impacting task initiation. Lack of focus means you jump from task to task, making organization harder. Emotional struggles like impulse control or self regulation create tension, making it even harder to stay on track. Add in working memory issues, and suddenly you forget steps or lose track of progress. The result is everything feels overwhelming, and ADHDers blame themselves, creating a cycle of shame and avoidance. So, a lot of people think ADHD is just, the 8-year-old hyperactive little boy or the person that talks a lot or that kind of struggles to stay on task with, conversation. They're like, "Oh, squirrel," that kind of thing. Definitely a thing. But there's so many layers and it's so nuanced that a lot of times it is hard to pull apart and to dismantle. A lot of my clients have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety. And it is kind of this what came first, the chicken or the egg situation. because unmanaged or even undermanaged ADHD can lead to so much anxiety of getting things right, and am I going to be late, and what about this, and I'm disorganized, and where did I put that thing, now I can't find my keys, and now I can't control my emotions because somebody said something, and my physiological response is to cry, speaking from experience. And so you do have this whole cluster of executive dysfunction that is going on. And so looking at where is that anxiety coming from? It's sometimes you can pinpoint it. I think the one of the biggest things I hear from ADHDers is overwhelm. We're overwhelmed. And most of the time, overwhelm leads to full-blown ADHD shutdown or at least ADHD paralysis, one of the two. So when you find yourself in that overwhelmed state, you have to be like, all right, wait, I got to stop. Again, that pause button. And a lot of us are like, I don't have time to pause. I'm already late. Or, whatever it is, with an actual meeting time or with life. So many ADHDers feel behind just in life in general. So how can you be like, wait a second, I know if I can just pause for even 10 seconds, I'm going to be able to regain a little bit of that calmness to say, all right, what do I actually need to do? A lot of that looks like externalizing your brain. And I know people are like, oh my God, if you tell me to make one more list. It's not even about necessarily making a list, even though you hear it a lot because it's helpful. Like that's why it's there. But a lot of it is just externalizing your brain. We have so much shit, good and bad, pinging around up here. And if we don't have an outlet for it, it can all get really muddled and it can get really heavy and it can get really confusing. And that's another great reason for therapy, for coaching, all of that, to be able to chat it out. If you're never externalizing what's going on inside, it's all going to build up and it's going to create, a pressure cooker. And that's what I see a lot specifically in men, is that pressure cooker effect where they just push it down, just push it down, just push it down, just push it down. And that does not end well for anybody.
No, it doesn't, especially when I've actually noticed this in talking to other people where there's actually a buddy of mine and who was saying that a lot of kids do not know how to acknowledge their emotions, and then they become men. They don't know how to acknowledge their emotions or be able to name their emotions. So they use the Gestalt therapy or Gestalt tactics to be able to name
Mhm.
it. So it's actually less. One of the things that I've done before in the past was helping people realize that you're being bound to your emotions in your past. So when you're able to start freeing it, you're able to lighten the rucksack. And what was interesting, what I was getting out of what you were talking about was how overwhelmed they used to be back in the early 2000s, actually late 2000s into like the 2019. It was interesting what, because when you were talking, I was like, wow, people with PTSD deal with something similar, but very different. And now, depending on how the brain thinks about it, you could be able to categorize it, be able to approach it, be able to understand it. Because I used to be very aware or overwhelmed when it came to, hey, I'm going to go for a drive. What about if there's bad drivers? What about this? What about that? And I'll have like 1,000 thoughts in my head. And I'm like, that's more anxiety. The other one is more of a lot of other thoughts that are fighting for the attention, and actually how much shame comes up because I should be able to do this. I should be able to do that. Why can't I? And actually using a lot of negative talk to myself where then it gets imposed onto the people I love and care about. So I think it's really interesting when you start to, and this is why I started this channel, was like, hey, these are some of the areas that we're overlooking, and how do we become radioactive to the partners and the people we care about, and how what's the importance of working on a mental health. It's not only for ourselves but it's for everybody else that we love.
Yeah, it is. I think going back to a little bit of what you were saying of like, what do people get out of this when they start seeing changes? And, it's a big part of it is self trust. a big part of what is developed is self-trust, and it's the same thing when you learn how to have, you know, vulnerable conversations with whoever, your partner, your therapist, your siblings, your parents, whoever. I mean, the people that you work with, your boss, your manager, being able to ask for accommodations, being able to advocate for yourself. All of that comes from a place of self-trust. And a vast majority of humans, ADHD or otherwise, struggle with self-trust. And so by starting with these little steps, and they can sometimes feel like mountains, like being on time, like putting your keys on the hook, like, these little things. What happens is if you can realize them, congratulate yourself for them, celebrate them, even if it's just like, you go to leave the house and the keys are where they're supposed to be like, hell yeah, that feels great. Because it does. It feels great. That is a great feeling that you put the thing where it was supposed to go and now you found it. And recognizing that, having that conversation with somebody, advocating for yourself, apologizing. Hey, I was having a moment. I was a bit of a dick. That's my bad. That feels great. I mean, not in the beginning, it feels bit shit. But, once you kind of get a little bit better at it, it's like we talked about, it's like training for a marathon. You first start training for a marathon, that first mile, you're gonna be sore as hell. But that's what it takes, is running 1 mile, then maybe a mile and a half, then maybe 3 miles. And it's all gonna build accumulatively, and it's gonna feel really good at the end, which is, something else that I see a lot of is people are like, full overhaul, all or nothing, overnight change my life, and that's the analogy I use is you wouldn't just wake up tomorrow and go run a marathon. Well, I don't know. You might. Um, I would not. I would not do that. This is the other problem with men. Men are like, "Yeah, I can do that." I mean, yeah, I'll probably be a little bit sore afterwards. I'm like, "Ugh, no, never mind. I need a new analogy." But, sustainably, you would not do that. You would train for it, and then it feels really good. And it's the same thing with our brains. We train for it, just like lifting. If we're going to the gym and we want to, start benching whatever, we're not going to start at benching. I don't even know what that would be, 100 pounds. We're not going to start there. We're going to start a lot smaller and build up from that and build up from that and build up from that. It is the exact same way with strengthening these mental practices, and communication and emotional regulation are mental practices. And they're going to feel really uncomfortable when you first do them, just like running that first mile would be. But the more you can push up against that edge and again, develop that self trust, build that self trust, rewire your nervous system that this is just unfamiliar. It is not unsafe. Those are two different things. I know you and I talked a lot about in that first call, your nervous system will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar paradise every single time. Even if familiarity is toxic and, a hellscape and terrible and all the things, it is familiar. And your nervous system equates familiarity with keeping you alive. And at the end of the day, that lizard brain is going to kick in, and it's all there to keep you alive. So that's where you have to, on purpose, with intention, start pushing up against that edge. If you want to change any of this, you've got to get more comfortable in the discomfort, because the discomfort will eventually become comfortable. You just got to give yourself a little bit of time. And we talked about this as well of like, I always kind of equate ADHD brains to a manual car versus an automatic car. So for, the automatic car, you get in, you start it up, you put it in drive, you go. That's it. You don't really have to think about it, which is more of that neurotypical brain. It just, planning and prioritizing, organization, it just kind of comes a bit naturally. Yep, this goes here, that goes there. Yep, of course, we got to prioritize this because it's got, the most urgency, whatever. ADHD brains, you've got to hit that pause button. You got to find your clutch. You got to figure out how to ease off of it without killing it. You got to find that bite point. You got to figure out where's your first gear, where's your reverse. And that takes a little bit more time and it can be frustrating for sure. Two things can exist at once. It can be necessary and frustrating as hell.
One of the things that you were talking about, and I wanted to rewind before we continue on with actually the multiple feelings or the multiple thoughts at the same time. We could white knuckle it, and you use the analogy of wake up in the morning, go run a marathon, and even though you
Mhm.
didn't train at all, you could white knuckle it through it. But then you could resent running for the rest of your life afterwards. You can resent the fact that you just overactive your brain and actually hurt yourself to the point. Most people will not be able to enjoy it because now a lot of us, not everybody, has this thing where they call lactic acid buildup. Some people do not have lactic acid buildup.
Okay.
And it's the same way with mentally. Some people can actually mentally overhaul the whole brain all at once, but most people will not. And you were talking about the self-love in a way. I'm using that where it's what are these small wins? How do these small wins look like? Why am I asking for these small wins? How are they actually being beneficial? And it's a way to continue to hit your dopamine hits while your
Mhm.
serotonin is actually growing or actually building up because of, hey, my keys are exactly where I put them. Holy shit. I actually
Yes.
showed up 5 minutes early this time. Joe does not need to. I see Joe, I'm able to wave to him and I'll say, hey, Joe, can you open up my door? And
Right.
it's like I can actually have a pleasantry with somebody instead of needing something from them because I'm an idiot. I didn't
Yeah.
pen. I didn't do this. And understanding the thoughts and how much more mental bandwidth this is and actually how foreign it can be because my dog just woke up. Um, the how foreign it is now we are changing our dialogues between people, how we are changing our relationships with people, how we are now renegotiating our relationships with other people. So that's why I think it's important to think about what does this look like and the familiar hell over the uncommon or unfamiliar paradise that we could live in, metaphorically speaking, and learning actually how to now renegotiate our own life of, hey, I have this situation. It might suck, but
Mhm.
now I'm living in a life that I would like. When you are getting towards the end of helping people with acceptance of, hey, now we're actually getting to this point where we're either going to graduate or we're going to move a little bit forward, like what are some of the signs to them to realize that, well, I feel like I'm getting there, but I am, and then also reminding them, hey, I'm not trying to hold you back. I want you to succeed, but I want you to realize you still have more work to do. What does that type of relationship look like?
Yeah, so it can be a little bit tricky with ADHD, right? Because, you know, it's not something that we're gonna cure. We're not trying to cure it because that would be setting an unrealistic and an unsustainable, goal. So we just want to look at really how are you feeling in terms of patterns, things that, like I said, with my client that was always late, and now she can look back and be like, I'm not late anymore. Now, that doesn't mean that there's still not, other struggles, but it's tricky because for a lot of us, we could go on with a coaching relationship forever in some form or fashion, right? Because again, it's such a great way to get the thoughts out of our head. When things do arise, we have somebody to talk to that understands a neurodivergent brain, which can be sometimes all you need is validation and to be like, yep, that sucks. Be like, right, I know, that kind of thing. So it really depends on where the person is and where they feel like that they have grown. And then if they want to keep up in some capacity, I'm always there for a once a month call, once a quarter call, whatever it is, just as kind of supplemental. And I know this is, I'm kind of plugging myself at this point, but I also have a monthly membership where people can always put their thoughts, their struggles, their whatever within, the community there. I can answer questions, people within the community can help support as well. So things like that can be really great for supplemental if you're, if you've moved on from one-on-one coaching or small group coaching or whatever that looks like. But it really looks, like I said, for people to say, how do I feel now based on how I was in the beginning? Do I need to keep going and keep refining, and am I in the place to like really do another round of this? Or do I feel like I need to take a step away, really implement what I've learned over this time, and then maybe come back with a fresh pair of eyes? So it just kind of depends person to person.
So plugging yourself back into this conversation, because like I said on our talk is that I wanted to be a symbiotic transaction. So
Mhm.
when somebody goes to see Leah, and when
Mm.
somebody gets a chance to see you, what does it actually look like as far as setting up an appointment?
Yeah.
How often does a person typically see a coach?
Yeah. So everybody's going to work a little bit differently. The way that I work is everybody gets a free initial 45-minute chat just to make sure that what you're dealing with doesn't require more of a therapeutic setting than a coaching setting. I definitely don't want to get into anything that is outside of my scope of practice, where somebody has just, whatever, liked my website or liked something I posted on Instagram and then paid me to be their coach and we're actually not a good fit. So I always do that initial call free of charge. You can book that through my website or through my Instagram. And then from there, we can lay out a bit of a framework. So we have an initial chat. Again, I look at where are you struggling? Where are the parts that you really want to focus on? What can we make foundational? So we want to make some of these small things that are tripping you up to be foundational because you can build on foundation. And that's part of the problem is we try something for a week and then we're like, ah, can't do it and we give up and this and that. So our foundations tend to be really rocky. So if we can really get into something and get it foundational, we can actually sustainably build on that. So what that typically looks like for me is an 8-week container. You get 8 calls in 8 weeks. Now, obviously, life happens. Sometimes 2 weeks go by, but I don't really like for much more than a week because what happens is we lose momentum. And for ADHDers, momentum is always going to supersede motivation. We are not a motivated people in that way. We work off of momentum. So we can get going, we can usually keep going, but it's the getting going bit. So I don't want us to meet once a month and basically start from scratch every time we're having a chat. So we're going to meet weekly for 8 weeks. I'm going to build out a roadmap for you based on that first initial call to really say, okay, these are the things in that first call that you said you were really struggling with. And everything in my world is taken with a grain of ish. So we have rules ish, we have plans ish, we have structure ish. We don't really do well with rigidity. 9 a.m. we do this, 9:15 we do this, 9:30 we do this. It doesn't really work well because as soon as something goes awry, it all goes to shit and we throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of situation. So we want to include and welcome that flexibility, be a bit more like water. So kind of more flow. So we want to build out that roadmap and then work from that. If something else comes up in that time together, you get a new job, break up with your partner, whatever, then we can always pivot. So that's how that works. It's a 8-week one-on-one container, and then you get membership in the community as well, where we have 3 times a day body doubling sessions that you can show up for, which is where everybody just shows up online, says what they're going to work on for an hour. Mics go off, cameras stay on, and you have your little like co-working pod. And then at the end of the call, hey, Will, how'd it go on those emails? Yep, got most of them done. Got a few more to do. I'm going to finish doing that before I grab lunch. Sweet. Um, we've got that. And then we have a Sunday call every Sunday, get your shit together Sunday, where we just take a look at the week ahead. Everybody just takes 20 minutes, look at your calendar, look at what's left over from last week. What do we need to move on to this week? All of that kind of stuff. And then I do 2 live coaching calls, a month in that community as well. So, it's a bunch of stuff. We got all kinds of stuff going on.
You guys have a lot of great stuff. So, an area that I actually want to poke a hole in for people when they actually are doing this coaching. What is the similarities and what's some of the similar differences of people wanting to self sabotage between, like, when you want to get better, when they actually want to really get better? What's the similarities? What's the differences between how men and women approach this in the 8 week container?
Yeah, I mean, it can be it's actually, in my experience, surprisingly enough, it is quite similar. As far as once people make the commitment and the investment, right? Because it's not free. So once people kind of, get over that hurdle of like, I'm here, I'm doing it, most people really try to show up for what is being put in front of them, the changes that they're wanting to make, and that is again a great reason to have an accountability buddy, a coach, a therapist, a whatever, because when I see that you're self-sabotaging, I'm going to lovingly and empathetically call you out on your shit. I'm not getting paid to sugarcoat and to, let you kind of get away with the same shit you've been getting away with. And again, I've gotten, pretty good at saying these things in a way that are, obviously non-confrontational in any form or fashion, but just kind of asking questions of like, hey, like, how do we think that's working out for us? What is in your control? One of the first questions I ask people when we kind of get into the nitty gritty is, and it's a really uncomfortable question, but where are you responsible for your own unhappiness? Right? Because it's so tempting and easy ish to blame other people and to take on a bit of a victim role. And that is not to invalidate life circumstances, your ADHD, your trauma, big T, little t, any of that. It just asks of you to take some responsibility. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle with, going to therapy at all or getting coaching at all, is because awareness asks for responsibility. And that is really scary for a lot of people. So a lot of people talk about the fear of failure. What I find is that more of us have the fear of responsibility,
Hmm.
which entangles the fear of failure, right? But like for me, okay, I've started this community. If I start it, I gotta show up. If I say I'm doing 2 calls a month, I gotta plan and execute and whatever, 2 calls a month. That is really scary, especially from somebody that has dropped the ball quite often in her life, right? And so, like I said, it is the fear of failure of like, I'll drop the ball, but it is the fear of like, I gotta show up.
Hmm.
And that's really scary for a lot of us. So again, the goal here is to not drop the ball. It's to be able to witness it, pick it up faster, and not beat the shit out of ourselves for dropping the ball.
Self love, self mastery, understanding. There's a lot of stuff that
Mhm.
goes involved into this, and oh, the reason I bring up
Yep.
not only just the positives, but the fear of the commitment, the fear of success is really, I believe a lot of us rather be, like you said, familiar, rather be familiar than actually moving on and being healthy. Um,
For sure.
and also how being accountable for our own mental illness, regardless if it's illness is the wrong word, I would say our own mental situations, like how
Mhm.
ADHD can bother us, how anxiety, depression, PTSD. And when we start
Mhm.
becoming accountable, it's, well, we're now pushing it away, but now how is this really impacting everybody else's lives? And picking up that torch, and what does that look like moving forward? And actually, how we could be a superpower. So, curious for you, Leah, is when you started noticing your own healing, how has ADHD really helped you out? And people might feel like that's such a weird way to look at it, but how has it really helped you when you started getting under control?
So I have the view after, I have ADHD myself. I've worked with hundreds of ADHDers at this point. ADHD is not a superpower, in my opinion. Um, and really very little of it, again, this is personal opinion,
Okay.
um, can be viewed as a superpower. Every once in a while, we can get into a hyper focus, and that can feel limitless, as long as it is something that, moves us forward. If we get hyper focused on, Pokemon, depending on what our career path is or how we're making money or, how we're showing up, that might not be the thing that we really want to hyper focus on, but our brains are like, "Nope, it's Pokemon. That's it. That's all we got, and we have to know everything about it. I need all the cards." Sorry, my nieces and nephews are obsessed right now. I don't understand. But anyway, like, and that's fine to have as a hobby. The problem is, and this is where ADHD is kind of misunderstood as well. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactive disorder. We are not deficit of attention. We got a shit ton of attention. The problem is wrangling it to where we need it to be, right? I'm having a conversation with you and my attention is going to, what am I gonna have for dinner? When is Tim getting home? Right? Not that that's happening. I am very engaged in this chat, but that is how, these things tend to show up, which nobody really thinks about. Um, so I think I've kind of gone off on a tangent. I've lost the plot. Where were we?
So the question I asked you about becoming a benefit, and then you brought up
Oh, yeah.
Pokemon, and then I thought about the fact of when we grew up, and I never knew you before I actually got in touch with you. We grew up in a
Right.
generation of where Pokemon started being a thing at roughly our ages on Game Boy. And yes, we were dating.
Yep.
I'm dating us. And
Yeah, I know. Thanks a lot for that. No, I'm kidding. Love a Game
and
Boy.
but the reason I actually bring this up is because like I know for me dealing with my own PTSD or PTS, depending on how you actually look at it, and being able to sit
Mhm.
with other people and help them navigate through it. Like I used to be one of those guys I couldn't have my back to the door, and it used to
Yeah.
cause me a lot of anxiety, or a wall of glass, like a bunch of windows, of
Mhm.
how I'm actually behind a box and how this becomes I'm an easier target. But then
Yeah.
also understanding, because my brain will still, and I was having this really good conversation with a buddy 2 days ago. I say, "Hey, thank you, Will," and I say it to my older self, my younger self, I should say, and say, "Thank you so much for actually having my back. I appreciate it," or becoming friends with the monster that I created to be able to keep me safe, and
Yeah, for
how
sure.
it keeps. And I was wondering if ADHD had something like that, where the more that you're able to become friends with the squirrel mind, how does it actually really able to help us out? And like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
Yes. So yes. So I think ADHD in itself is not the superpower. Managing it for sure is huge in any capacity, right? Even if it's just putting the keys on the hook, that's one less thing that you're beating yourself up about or forgetting about. So, yeah, definitely learning to manage some of these things, like you were talking about with your PTSD, or however you want to look at that. Being able to say again that acknowledgement. So, kind of some of the pillars of my work are self awareness, which we've talked about a ton, self acceptance, radical honesty, and minute action. So those are kind of the four pillars of what I work with. But having that awareness around this is the way that my brain works. These are the things that I need. If I'm going to ride the train or go to the grocery store, I need my headphones. I don't do well with a lot of chaos and noise and sounds and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And it's fine. I can do it. I'm just gonna feel more comfortable if I got these guys in. I'm really light sensitive. So I need to have sunglasses with me at all times, or I'm just not going to be in as good of a mood or feel as comfortable as I could. And this isn't necessarily an ADHD thing, this is just a self-awareness thing. I'm cold, like, all the time. Not all the time, but I need to, like, always have, especially living in Germany, I need to have, like, a shawl, a cardigan, a jacket, something, because 'cause I'm going to be cold. So, even I leave the house in summer and I'm taking the train up to Munich, I need to have something in case I get cold, just because I know that's gonna help. So, same thing, with what you're talking about with the management of these things. If you can know, or at least, start the process of working with your brain versus against it, just remember the thing. Why do you have to write everything down? Just remember it. Well, yeah, let me know how that's going for you. Instead of leaning in and saying, you know what? Yeah, I'll write it down real quick. Yeah, I'll send myself a voice note. Yeah, I'll put that in my calendar. Sure. That's going to help future me. That is a gift to future Leah, and I love a good gift, right? So, looking at that side of things, the management side of it is definitely a superpower, and it's definitely a gift to be able to do that. But it takes time and awareness and kind of digging in and maybe, you know, obviously, if you want things to change, something's got to change. And if you want parts about yourself to change, you got to change. And that is hard. And sometimes it's exhausting. So sometimes people will be like, oh, this is too much. Right. And you've heard this is hard and that is hard. So choose your hard, which I don't really love because I think a lot of times that's pretty shit. But when it comes to some of these things, it is true. Life with unmanaged ADHD is hard. Managing your ADHD, also hard until it's not. Just like running that mile. That mile is hard until it's not. But if you wanna be able to run a mile, you gotta get up and at least walk around the block and start the process. Yeah.
So one of the questions that I got from Chelsea, she said, "Do you put stock in the
Pomodoro.
POMODOR? Do you put in that method?"
Yeah, so, yes, definitely. I do love a good Pomodoro method. I don't For me, the Pomodoro is too short. So Pomodoro method is this idea that you work for 25 minutes and then you take a pause for 5 minutes. And that pause could just be standing up, stretching, whatever, getting a glass of water, whatever you need to do, and then you go back to work. For me, that's a little bit too close together for me personally. So I tend to set that a little bit further apart. But yeah, I think also part of ADHD management is building a toolkit. So maybe that looks like, I've got an hour before, my next call. I'm going to really dive into whatever this task is. I'm going to kind of see how much I can get done before that next call because that's what I have the capacity for today. Maybe tomorrow, depending on what's happening, it's the twilight week. Nobody knows what day it is. Um, you know, yeah, where are your hormones? Where's your capacity? Do you have family coming over? Do you need, all of that? Maybe tomorrow it looks like I am going to do those really just little chunks. I can do 25 minutes of this because it feels like bamboo shoots under my fingernails. I do not want to do this, but I got to get it done. Maybe it's taxes, maybe it's invoices, maybe it's, whatever it is. So I have a timer on my desk. I can see it, I can see time because I'm time blind. So if I can set this and say, all right, I'm going to work on this for whatever, however long. That's why those body doubling sessions are really great. They are set for usually about 50 minutes. and you've got 50 minutes to really just dive in to whatever it is that you're doing. And people get it's great. It's actually hilarious what people have done in those 50-minute sessions. Yeah.
Well, we're about an
Now I'm
hour.
reading the comments.
Well,
I'm
we're
over here
about
like,
an
no, no.
oh, no, she's
Go ahead.
she's a very wonderful person. Her name is Chelsea.
Yeah.
She is helps out a lot of veterans over in her job. She is
Okay.
a small, what we call a fun-sized Marine. She's about 5'2", and she wears like a utility belt, and it's very fun. But I
Nice.
do appreciate her, and I do actually, I'm extremely grateful for her. And
Yeah. I
so,
love that she says that her counselor says that it's a trauma response, that she has a jacket, sunglasses, headphones, and 20 other things. Could be.
mhm.
I think my response to that is, yeah, and who
Yep.
cares? Right? As long as it's not like, hurting your shoulder because your backpack is too heavy or whatever it is, who gives a shit? Take your jacket, take your sunglasses, take your headphones, take your lip gloss, take your hand sanitizer, take all the things you need. That's great. That's again, that self-awareness of what you need. So, I'm here for it.
I love it. So I was actually going to ask you, is there anything that you would like to give to the audience? Any other feedback about you? And before we wrap it up.
No, I think we've covered a lot. If you have any other questions, like I said, people can find me on Instagram at adhd.coach.leah. You can head over to my website, leahccoaching.com. Any of that, if you've got any questions, that's about it. Like I said, I always offer that free 45-minute call. So if anybody is interested, that is definitely the best place to start so that we can get the conversation going, get some momentum built up, get that roadmap kind of blueprint built out for you, and then go from there.
Well, I really do appreciate making the time. I know it's a little bit later in the night, and I I do really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been really fun.